On a September night in West Virginia, something bright crossed the sky and fell toward a wooded ridge. Minutes later, witnesses said they found a towering figure with a glowing face, and the story never really left Braxton County. This is the Flatwoods Monster case, where a simple search for a fallen object became one of America's strangest close encounters. What did those witnesses actually see in the dark woods? In 1952, the area was still deeply rural, with narrow roads, scattered homes, and a sky that felt close enough to touch. In places like this, any light overhead could become a lasting memory. Braxton County sat in a landscape of farms, forests, and steep ridges, where people knew the land well and knew when something did not belong. That familiarity is part of what makes the account so hard to dismiss. The central claim began with a flash in the sky, seen by local boys and a neighborhood girl who said they watched it descend behind a hill. They went to look, expecting wreckage, not a mystery. As they climbed toward the landing area, the air reportedly carried a sharp smell, and a strange red glow seemed to pulse through the trees. The scene was ordinary woodland, yet the witnesses described it like a threshold. Then came the figure itself, tall, upright, and unlike anything they expected to meet in the woods. Witnesses claimed its face shone like a mask, with a dark body and a broad, almost mechanical outline. The description changed a little with each retelling, but the core image stayed the same. Something stood there in the dark, and the children ran back down the hill in fear and confusion. When adults returned with them, the place felt different, as if the first encounter had already altered the night. That second visit became crucial because it added details that kept the case alive. Near the site, investigators later noted disturbed leaves and a strong odor, though the physical trace was never dramatic enough to settle the matter. Even so, the witnesses insisted the object, or being, had been real. One of the most compelling details was the shape of the head and face, because it sounded less like a wild animal and more like a crafted object. That is where the case slips from folklore into something harder to place. The second detail was movement, or the lack of it. Witnesses did not describe a creature charging through the trees. They described a presence that seemed to stand, watch, and dominate the clearing. The third detail was the smell, often remembered as acrid and unsettling, as if something electrical or chemical had been released nearby. In a case with so little hard evidence, that sensory memory matters. The fourth detail was the timing. A bright object in the sky, then a strange figure on the hill, all within a short span of time. That sequence is why many people still connect the two events. Local reporting quickly turned the sighting into a national curiosity, and sketches spread the image far beyond Braxton County. The monster became part of the American post-war imagination almost overnight. That publicity matters because it preserves the story while also reshaping it. Once a case enters the press, memory, fear, and retelling can sharpen some details and blur others. Still, the original witnesses were not describing a polished legend at first. They were frightened kids and adults, trying to make sense of a night that seemed to break the normal rules of the woods. Supporters of the extraordinary interpretation point to the combination of sky event, ground encounter, and consistent core imagery. Taken together, those elements feel less like a single mistake and more like a chain of unexplained events. They also note that the creature's description does not fit neatly into any familiar local animal. A huge body, a glowing face, and a hovering or gliding impression leave the case open to stranger possibilities. Skeptics question whether the witnesses may have encountered an owl, a tree, and a burst of fear that fused them into one unforgettable image. In the dark, perception can become a powerful storyteller. That explanation is plausible enough to matter, especially because the site was wooded, steep, and difficult to read at night. A branch, a shadow, and a startled group can create a lasting legend. But the owl theory does not fully capture the reported scale, the strange smell, or the sense that something mechanical was present. Those are the details that keep the case from settling into a neat answer. The Flatwoods story also sits inside a larger 1950s wave of flying saucer anxiety and fascination. In that era, the American sky had become a place where people expected the impossible. That cultural backdrop does not erase the testimony, but it helps explain why the case spread so quickly. A strange light over a quiet county was exactly the kind of event that could ignite national attention. What remains difficult is the emotional shape of the encounter. The witnesses were not chasing fame. They were reacting to something they believed was standing in front of them. And once that kind of memory takes hold, it can outlast every later explanation. The story becomes part of the land itself, passed along by people who still remember where the hill rises and the trees begin. Investigators and writers have returned to Flatwoods for decades, each trying to separate residue from rumor. Yet the case keeps its power because the basic question never changes. What was on that hill? If it was a misread animal or a trick of light, it became one of the most enduring misreadings in American mystery lore. If it was something else, the witnesses may have brushed against a reality that language could barely hold. The strongest case for the unknown is not certainty, but persistence. Decades later, the same details still gather around the event. The light, the smell, the face, the fear, and the hill. That persistence is why Flatwoods remains more than a local legend. It is a reminder that some encounters arrive with just enough physical reality to resist being fully explained away. Maybe the night held an animal, a meteor, and a frightened group of children. Or maybe it held a brief contact with something whose shape and intent were never fully understood. Either way, the Flatwoods Monster still stands at the edge of the known world, where a bright object crossed the sky and a small community looked up together. And the question it left behind is still waiting in the dark.